close your eyes and let me take you back through the mists of time, to a place where moonlight danced on ancient stones, and wisdom flowed like gentle streams through forgotten realms. Tonight, we journey together to discover a queen, not remembered in grand monuments or towering statues, but in the quiet whispers of wind through old oak trees, and in the soft call of owls that still echo through the English countryside. Her name was Æthelflæd, and she was the Lady of Mercia, though the world knew her by another name, the Forgotten Queen, the one who spoke with owls. Settle in. Let your breathing slow as we step into her world, a world where strength wore no armor, where wisdom spoke in whispers, and where a queen's greatest victories were won not with sword, but with gentle understanding. In the year 870, in the soft glow of candlelight, a daughter was born to Alfred the Great, King of Wessex. But this is not a story of grand births or royal fanfare. Picture instead a quiet chamber where a gentle woman holds her newborn close, while outside the world trembles with uncertainty. Vikings sail up English rivers. Kingdoms rise and fall like morning mist. Yet here, in this moment, there is only peace. Little Æthelflæd, her name meaning noble strength, but the strength she would show the world would be unlike any queen before her. It would be the strength of listening, and in that sacred silence, she listened, not with her ears, but with her heart, to the deep wisdom that flows through all living things. The owls spoke to her in their ancient language about the patterns of weather, about the underground streams that had shifted, about the delicate balance that had been disturbed. She learned that far upstream, men had built new mills, changing the flow of water, disturbing the natural rhythms that brought rain. And she understood that to heal the land, they must first heal their relationship with it. The next morning, Æthelflæd returned to the castle and spoke with her father, not of magic or miracles, but of practical wisdom, of how the mills upstream needed adjusting, of how certain rituals of respect for the land had been forgotten, of how the people had lost their connection to the natural world. Alfred listened and marveled at his daughter's deep understanding. Together, they sent envoys upstream. They worked with the mill owners. They restored the old customs that honored the earth. And slowly, gently, the rains returned. Word spread of the young woman who spoke with owls, who understood the secret language of nature. But those who came seeking her found no mystical enchantress, only a gentle soul who listened deeply, who spoke softly, and who helped others find their own connection to the wisdom all around them. In the year 887, arrangements were made for Æthelflæd to marry. This was the way of kingdoms, daughters given to forge alliances, to strengthen bonds between realms. But fate, or perhaps the ancient wisdom that guided her, brought her not just a husband, but a true partner. Æthelred, alderman of Mercia, was not like other lords. He had heard the stories of the gentle woman who spoke with owls, and he came to the marriage not seeking to possess or control, but hoping to understand. This unusual gift she carried. Their wedding was held in the soft light of early autumn, when the leaves had just begun to turn, and the owls called their blessings from the ancient trees. It was said that during the ceremony, a great barn owl settled on the church tower and remained there, perfectly still, as if presiding over the union. But this was no ordinary marriage of political convenience. Æthelred, wise beyond his years, recognized the treasure he had been given. Not a silent wife to bear children and manage his household, but a partner whose wisdom complemented his own, whose gentle strength would help him rule with justice and compassion. In their private chambers, in the quiet hours of evening, Æthelred would listen as his wife shared what she had learned from the owls, from the wind, from the deep currents of knowing that flowed through all things. And he began to understand that ruling a kingdom was not about commanding, but about listening, about finding the natural harmony that already existed and helping it flourish. Their first child, a daughter, was born in the spring of 888, and it was said that on the night of her birth, every owl in Mercia sang a song of welcome, so beautiful that even the hardest hearts were moved to tears. They named her Elfwin, meaning elf friend, for she seemed to carry her mother's gift for speaking with all creatures. Together, Æthelflæd and Æthelred began to transform Mercia, not through conquest or force, but through understanding. They established laws that protected the ancient forests. They created sanctuaries for wild creatures. They built their policies on the wisdom that comes from listening to the land itself. The owls, always the owls, continued to guide them. In times of difficult decisions, Æthelflæd would walk in the moonlight and sit quietly, listening to their ancient counsel, and somehow the right path would always become clear, not through magical revelation, but through the deep understanding that comes when we truly listen to the wisdom all around us. But even in this gentler realm, her first great challenge came not from external enemies, but from within. A dispute between two powerful lords over lands, over water rights, over ancient grievances that had festered for generations. The court expected her to choose sides, to impose her will, to rule with the iron fist that men understood. Instead, she did something different, something that had never been tried. She invited both lords to join her on a moonlit walk through the ancient grove where the owls gathered, where the old wisdom still whispered through the leaves. There, in the sacred silence, she asked each lord to speak their truth, but softly, quietly, so as not to disturb the owls. And as they spoke, their voices naturally grew gentler. Their anger began to soften, and they began to hear not just their own grievances, but the pain in each other's words. The owls, perched in the branches above, listened too, with their great round eyes full of ancient patience. And somehow, in that sacred space, the two lords began to understand that their conflict was not truly about land, but about respect, about being heard, about feeling valued. By dawn, they had found a solution, not through compromise, but through genuine understanding. They would share the disputed lands, working together, combining their strengths, creating something better than either could achieve alone. The owls, as the sun rose, flew silently away, their work complete. Word spread of the queen who resolved conflicts, not through force, but through wisdom, who brought enemies together in the sacred space where all creatures could be heard. Leaders from other kingdoms began to seek her counsel, not for battle strategies, but for the deeper art of making peace. But Æthelflæd understood that sometimes even the gentlest souls must prepare for harder times. The Vikings still threatened, still sailed their longships, still sought to claim English lands. And so, she began to build not just walls of stone, but networks of understanding, fortresses of the heart. Her approach to defense was unlike any the world had seen. Yes, she built great fortress towns, sturdy walls, strong gates. But each fortress was designed not just to keep enemies out, but to welcome friends in. to be a place where people could gather, where communities could flourish, where the old wisdom could be preserved. At Warwick, her first great fortress, she created something new. Within the protective walls, she established gardens where herbs grew for healing, where owl boxes provided homes for her feathered counselors, where children could learn not just the arts of war, but the deeper arts of peace. The building of each fortress was an act of community. Men and women, working together, sharing stories as they worked, creating bonds stronger than stone. The owls would come each evening to watch the progress, perching on the rising walls, as if blessing the work with their presence. At Runcorn, at Stafford, at Tamworth, each fortress rose, not through forced labor, but through willing hands, guided by a queen who understood that true strength comes not from walls alone, but from the connections between human hearts, from the trust that grows when people feel truly heard, truly valued. The design of each fortress reflected her deeper wisdom. The great halls were circular, like the flight patterns of owls, allowing every voice to be heard equally. The gardens were planted not just for beauty, but according to the ancient knowledge of which plants brought healing, which attracted beneficial creatures, which created harmony between human needs and natural rhythms. In the evenings, when the work was done, Æthelflæd would walk among her people, listening to their stories, their hopes, their concerns, and the owls would call from the towers, their voices weaving through the human conversations, creating a symphony of community where every voice mattered, where every creature had a place. The Vikings, when they came, found something they had never encountered: fortresses that could not be taken, not because their walls were impregnable, but because the people within them were truly united, truly committed to defending not just their homes, but their way of life, their connections to each other, their bond with the land itself. But Æthelflæd's greatest victory in the year 915, a great crisis arose. The Vikings, led by a fierce warrior named Ragnald, threatened to overwhelm all of northern England. Other kingdoms prepared for war, sharpened their swords, called up their armies, expected the worst. But Æthelflæd chose a different path. She sent a message, not to the Viking leader, but to his wife, a woman named Astrid, who had been captured in a raid years before and had become, through necessity, a voice of wisdom in the Viking camp. The message was simple, an invitation to meet in a neutral place, a small island in the river where owls nested, where the old oak trees cast gentle shadows, where the sound of water flowing created a natural peace, a place where women could speak as mothers, as keepers of wisdom, as those who understood the true cost of war. The meeting was arranged for the full moon, when the owls would be most active, when their calls would remind both women of the ancient connections that transcend human conflicts. Æthelflæd came alone, as promised, carrying only a simple gift, a small wooden carving of an owl in flight. Astrid arrived with her own small. The transformation spread slowly, like dawn light, touching first the highest hills, then flowing down into the valleys. Other kingdoms began to send their young people to learn from the Queen of Mercia, and each student carried back not just knowledge, but a new way of being, a gentler way of strength. Æthelflæd would often walk in the early morning through the gardens where her students practiced the art of listening. She would watch as they sat in meditation with owls perched nearby, and she would remember her own childhood, when she first learned to hear the ancient wisdom that flows through all living things. The gift had multiplied like seeds scattered on fertile ground. What she had received in solitude was becoming a harvest of peace that would feed generations. Each student would become a teacher. Each teacher would plant new seeds of understanding, of connection, of the gentle strength that comes from wisdom rather than force. In the chronicles of those times, scribes began to write not just of battles won and territories claimed, but of a different kind of victory, the victory of understanding over ignorance, of connection over isolation, of the wisdom that comes when we learn to listen to the deepest truths that unite all living things. As Æthelflæd entered the twilight of her life, she found herself spending more and more time in the quiet places where she had first learned to listen to the ancient wisdom, the great halls and council chambers. She gradually left to younger hands, hands that had learned her gentle way of strength. In the year 918, when she was 48, she knew that her time as queen was drawing to a close, but she felt no sadness, only a deep satisfaction, like a gardener who has planted seeds. that will grow long after the gardener is gone. The transformation she had helped nurture was now strong enough to continue without her. Her daughter, Elfwyn, had grown into a wise leader with her own gifts, her own connections to the natural world. The young people who had learned at her court were now leaders in their own right, carrying forward the gentle revolution that had begun with a child listening to owls in a moonlit window. More and more, she was drawn to the original owl grove where she had first learned to truly listen. There, in the quiet hours, before dawn and after sunset, she would sit in perfect stillness while the owls, her oldest teachers, shared with her the final lessons of a life well lived. The owls seemed to understand that their time together was precious. They would come, not just the few who had always been her companions, but owls from all across the kingdom. Great barn owls, tiny screech owls, majestic eagle owls, all gathering in the sacred grove for what felt like a final celebration of the connection between human and natural wisdom. In those last months, visitors would often find her sitting beneath the great oak with owls perched all around her, not speaking, but simply being, in perfect harmony with the creatures who had taught her the deepest truths about strength, about wisdom, about the art of living in balance with all of creation. Her final words, spoken to her daughter on a quiet evening when the owls were calling across the countryside, were not about kingdoms or politics or the affairs of state, but about the simple truth that she had learned in childhood and practiced throughout her life. Listen, she whispered, really listen, and you will always know what needs to be done. On June 12th, in the year 918, Æthelflæd, the Lady of Mercia, the queen who spoke with owls, passed peacefully in her sleep, and it was said that at the moment of her passing, every owl in England called out together in a song so beautiful, so full of love and gratitude, that even the stones seemed to weep for the loss of one who had understood the secret language of the heart. But death could not end what Æthelflæd had begun. The seeds she had planted continued to grow. The students she had taught became teachers. The wisdom she had shared spread like ripples on a still pond, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. In the months after her passing, something remarkable happened. The owls throughout her kingdom began to behave differently. They would approach the fortress towns, the learning centers, the places where her students continued her work, and they would call, not with their usual hunting cries, but with softer sounds, almost like gentle guidance. The people began to understand that the connection between their beloved queen and the creatures of the wild had not ended with her death, but had transformed into something larger, something that would continue to guide and teach for generations to come. Ælfwine, now ruler in her own right, found that she could sense her mother's presence, not as a ghost or a haunting, but as a living wisdom that flowed through the land, through the creatures, through the very air itself. When difficult decisions arose, she would walk to the owl grove and sit quietly, and somehow the right answer would always come. The fortress towns that Æthelflæd had built became centers of a new kind of learning, where the practical arts of building and farming blended with the deeper arts of listening and understanding, where children learned not just to read and write, but to read the signs that nature writes in the flight of birds, the growth of plants, the changing of seasons. Visitors from distant lands came to see these remarkable places where former enemies lived in peace, where conflicts were resolved through understanding rather than force, where even the wildest creatures seemed to trust the gentle humans who had learned to speak their language. And always the owls continued their vigil, nesting in the fortress towers, calling from the ancient groves, watching over the communities that had learned to live in harmony with the natural world. They became living symbols of the wisdom that transcends death, of the love that continues long after the lover has passed on. In the chronicles of later times, historians would write of Æthelflæd's military victories, her fortress building, her political alliances. But those who truly knew her would remember something different. They would remember the gentle strength that comes from listening, the quiet courage that trusts in wisdom over force, the love that sees in every creature a teacher, a guide, a friend. As decades passed, the story of Æthelflæd grew and changed, like all stories do when they are told and retold around hearth fires in the long winter nights. But at the heart of every version remained the same truth that she had discovered as a child, listening to owls in her father's castle. The truth that real strength comes not from conquering, but from understanding, not from forcing, but from connecting, not from speaking, but from listening to the ancient wisdom that flows through all things, connecting every creature in the great web of life itself. In remote villages, grandmothers would tell their grandchildren about the queen who could speak with owls, who built her kingdom not with sword and shield, but with patience and understanding and the gentle art of helping others find their own wisdom, their own connection to the natural world. The stories sometimes grew in the telling. Some said she could fly like the owls themselves. Others claimed she lived for centuries, watching over England from the ancient groves. But those who knew the deeper truth understood that in a way both stories were true. Her spirit had indeed taken flight, and her influence would indeed last for centuries. In the great libraries of later ages, scholars would debate the historical facts of her life, trying to separate legend from truth. But the children who still lived in the villages near the old fortress towns needed no scholarly debate. They could feel her presence in the gentle hoot of barn owls, in the wise eyes of woodland creatures, in the very air itself, whenever they sat quietly and listened. The owl grove where she had first learned to truly listen became a place of pilgrimage, not for great ceremonies or loud celebrations, but for quiet moments of reflection. People would come from all over England to sit beneath the ancient oaks and practice the art she had mastered, the art of listening to the wisdom that speaks in silence. And the owls, descendants of those who had first taught her, continued to nest there, continued to call their ancient songs of wisdom and connection. They became living guardians of her memory and her teaching, ensuring that no one who truly sought to understand would ever seek in vain. In the hearts of those who practiced her gentle way, Æthelflæd lived on, not as a distant historical figure, but as a living presence, a reminder that true power lies not in domination, but in service, not in conquest, but in connection, not in the noise of conflict, but in the quiet wisdom that comes when we learn to listen to the deepest truths of existence itself. And so, as we reach the end of our journey together through the life and legend of Æthelflæd, the queen who spoke with owls, we find ourselves back where we began, in the quiet place, where wisdom lives, where true strength is born from gentleness, where the greatest victories are won through understanding. Her story reminds us that in every age, in every time, there are those who choose the path of wisdom over the path of force, who understand that real power comes not from making others bend to our will, but from learning to bend ourselves to the greater wisdom that flows through all things. The owls that called to her across the centuries still call to us today if we have the patience to listen, if we have the courage to sit quietly in the spaces between noise and silence, conflict and peace, fear and understanding, and hear the ancient voice that speaks in every living thing. In our modern world, where so much noise fills our days, where conflict seems to dominate the headlines, where force is often mistaken for strength, we need, more than ever, the gentle wisdom that Æthelflæd discovered in those quiet moments of connection with the natural world. Her life teaches us that true leadership is not about commanding others, but about listening so deeply that we can hear the wisdom that already exists in every situation, in every heart, in every creature that crosses our path. The fortress towns she built still stand in England today, their stones weathered by centuries of wind and rain, but their foundations remain strong, just as the foundations of understanding that she laid in human hearts remain strong across the centuries, continuing to inspire those who seek a gentler way of being strong. And in the quiet moments, when the world seems too loud, too harsh, too full of conflict, we can remember the queen who spoke with owls and find in her example a different way of moving through the world with wisdom instead of weapons, with understanding, instead of anger, with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing we are all connected in the great web of life. The owls continue their nightly flights across the English countryside, their calls carrying messages of ancient wisdom, reminding us that some truths are too important to be forgotten, too beautiful to be lost in the noise of human conflict, too necessary to be ignored in our rush toward tomorrow. As we sit here in the quiet space that stories create, between the telling and the listening, between the past and the present, we might ask ourselves, what would Æthelflæd say to us today if she could speak across the centuries, if her wisdom could find voice in our modern world? Perhaps she would remind us that the same forces that threatened her kingdom still threaten ours, not Vikings sailing up rivers, but the ancient enemies of understanding, the timeless foes of wisdom, fear, and anger, and the terrible loneliness that comes when we forget our connection to each other and to the natural world that sustains us all. She might tell us that the fortresses we need to build today are not made of stone and mortar, but of patience and compassion and the gentle strength that comes from really listening to the voices that speak in the spaces between words, in the silence between heartbeats, in the wisdom that flows through all living things. The owls that guided her still fly through our world, though we, in our busy lives, might not notice their presence. Their ancient calls still carry the same messages of patience, of wisdom, of the deep knowledge that comes when we learn to be still, to be quiet, to be present to what is rather than what we think should be. In our relationships with family, with friends, with strangers, we might practice the art she mastered, the art of listening, not just to words, but to the feelings underneath the words, not just to what people say, but to what they need to be heard, to be understood, to be valued for who they truly are. In our communities, we might remember her example of building, not walls, to keep others out, but bridges to bring others in, of creating spaces where different voices can be heard, where conflicts can be resolved through understanding rather than force, where everyone has a place and a purpose and a voice. In our relationship with the natural world, we might learn from her deep connection to the creatures around her, remembering that we are not separate from nature, but part of it, not its masters, but its partners, called to live in harmony with all the life that shares this beautiful, fragile, precious world. The wisdom she discovered in those quiet moments with the owls is not ancient history, but timeless truth, not medieval magic, but eternal reality, available to anyone who has the patience to sit quietly and listen to the deep currents of understanding that flow through every moment of every day. And so, as our story draws toward its close, let us spend these final moments together, not just hearing about the art of listening, but practicing it, learning from Æthelflæd's example how to find the owl wisdom that lives within us all. Breathe slowly, deeply. Let your shoulders relax. Let your mind settle like dust, settling on a windless day. Feel yourself becoming still, not the stillness of sleep, but the alert stillness of the owl perched on a branch, aware of everything around it, but not disturbed by any of it. Listen to the sounds around you, not judging them, not trying to change them, just noticing the hum of electricity, the whisper of air through vents, the distant sound of traffic or voices or whatever fills your particular corner of the world. Let each sound be what it is without needing to be different. Now, listen more deeply to the sounds within you, the rhythm of your breathing, the beating of your heart, the subtle sounds of life continuing its ancient dance within your body. Notice how these sounds connect you to all living things, how your heartbeat echoes the heartbeat of every creature that has ever lived. In this quiet space, you might begin to sense what Æthelflæd discovered in her childhood, the presence of a deeper wisdom that speaks, not in words, but in the wordless language of connection, of understanding, of love that flows beneath the surface of all things. This is the wisdom of the owls, the ancient knowledge that transcends human language, human conflict, human limitation. It is the wisdom that knows we are all part of something larger than ourselves, all connected in the great web of existence, all precious, all important, all deserving of respect and understanding. Feel this connection not as an idea, but as a reality. Feel how your breathing connects you to the plants that produce the oxygen you breathe. Feel how your heartbeat connects you to the ancient rhythm that has pulsed through life for millions of years. Feel how your presence here in this moment connects you to Æthelflæd across the centuries, and to all who have ever sought wisdom in the quiet places of the heart. This is her gift to us, not just the story of her life, but the practice of her wisdom, the art of listening so deeply that we can hear the voice of understanding that speaks in every moment, calling us to be kinder, to be wiser, to be more than we ever imagined possible. And now, as we prepare to return to our daily lives, carrying with us the wisdom of the queen who spoke with owls, we realize that her story is not really ending, but beginning anew in each of us who choose to listen with the patience of ancient wisdom, to love with the gentleness of true strength. Tomorrow, when you wake, you might remember to pause for just a moment and listen to the world around you, not with the need to fix or change or control, but with the simple desire to understand, to connect, to be present to the miracle of existence that unfolds in every moment. When conflicts arise in your life, as they inevitably will, you might remember Æthelflæd's approach and ask yourself, not how can I win, but how can I understand? Not how can I be right, but how can we find a way that honors everyone's truth? Not how can I force this situation to change, but how can I listen deeply enough to hear what is really being asked of me? In moments of decision, you might find a quiet place and sit in the stillness that Æthelflæd learned to trust, listening not just to your own thoughts, but to the deeper wisdom that speaks in the space between thoughts, in the silence between heartbeats, in the ancient voice that knows what serves the highest good of all. The owls that called to her across the centuries still call to us today in the twilight hours when the world grows quiet and the deeper truths have space to be heard. Their calls remind us that some wisdom is too important to be lost, too beautiful to be forgotten, too necessary to be ignored in our rush toward tomorrow. And in the quiet moments when you feel overwhelmed by the noise and conflict of modern life, you might remember the fortress towns that she built and realize that you too can create spaces of peace in your own life, places where understanding can flourish, where different voices can be heard, where the gentle strength of wisdom can grow. These might be physical spaces in your home or garden where you can sit quietly and listen to the deeper currents of life. Or they might be spaces in time, moments you set aside each day for the practice of listening, of being present, of connecting with the wisdom that flows through all things. The legacy of Æthelflæd lives on, not in monuments of stone, but in the lives of those who choose her path, the path of listening, the path of understanding, the path of gentle strength that comes from connection rather than conquest, from service rather than dominion, from love rather than fear. And so, dear friend, as our journey through the life and legend of Æthelflæd comes to its close, we find ourselves not at an ending, but at a beginning, not at the conclusion of a story, but at the start of a new chapter in the eternal tale of wisdom and connection and love. The owls continue their flights across the English countryside, their calls carrying messages of ancient wisdom, reminding us that some truths transcend time, some connections survive death, some love endures forever in the hearts of those who choose to listen, to understand, to care. Tonight, when you hear the call of an owl or feel the gentle presence of any wild creature, remember the queen who spoke with owls, and know that the same wisdom that guided her is available to you. If you have the courage to be still, the patience to listen, the heart to understand, may you find in your own life the gentle strength that comes from wisdom. May you discover the quiet courage that trusts in understanding rather than force. May you learn the ancient art of listening so deeply that you can hear the voice of love that speaks in every moment of every day. And may you carry forward the legacy of Æthelflæd, the forgotten queen, who was never truly forgotten, because her wisdom lives on in every heart that chooses compassion over conflict, understanding over anger, connection over conquest. The owls are calling across the centuries, calling us to remember who we really are, calling us to come home to the wisdom that has always been ours, calling us to take our place in the great web of existence, where every voice matters, every heart is precious, every soul is heard. Sleep well, dear friend, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle wisdom of the queen who spoke with owls, and may you wake tomorrow with her courage in your heart, her understanding in your mind, and her love lighting your way forward into whatever adventures await.